first presenter is Mark Johnson, and you've been hearing about him throughout this conference. Now you actually have a chance to see him. Mark is an associate professor with the University of Notre Dame's Institute for Educational Initiatives, author of the recent book, The Middle Kingdom and Big Sky, A History of the Chinese Experience in Montana, which was published by the University of Nebraska Press in 2022. It won the 2023 Carolyn Bancroft History Prize from the Denver Public Library and the 2023 WHA Turrentine Jackson Award. Now, Mark's research focuses on telling the history of Chinese communities in Montana in their own words and through a global lens. His presentation will take us back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when Chinese Montanans were reformers, leaders, and soldiers actively struggling to strengthen their homeland, and in doing so, strengthen themselves. Please join me in welcoming Professor Johnson to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the organizers, Dr. Larkin and Dr. Lee. Thank you to the co-panelists. These have been great presentations. I'm excited to welcome you to my home state. I was born and raised in Montana, so I'm proud of this place. I got out and saw the world a little bit, and in those interactions came across some documents and some ways of working to tell the history of Montana's Chinese communities, I hope in sensitive and complicated ways to try and bring honor to their struggle and their hopes and dreams. So it's been a great conference. I've come from more of the historical background, but being with art historians and people bringing such varied experiences has been very insightful and enjoyable. So it's going to rely a little bit on some prior knowledge of Chinese politics, but I think this is the perfect audience to do this with. So when I started this work, I constantly get the question, how many Chinese were there in Montana, Mark? And then I push back the question and say, well, what are you talking about? And where are you talking about? So I came up with this map that I hope does three things. I hope it shows the geography of where the Chinese were located across the Big Sky State, the demography, how large their population was, and the chronology of when it was at its height. And so you can see, for instance, I think we've got the pointer here. Yeah. Okay, Butte, Montana, or Butte, America, is the largest community of Chinese. That number says about 841. We can assume that almost all of these numbers are slight undercounting, because many of the Chinese in the American West were here under less than legal means and probably wanted to avoid government enumerators and things like that. So Butte's Chinese community was very large, probably about 1,000 when corroborated against other sources. But that was in early 1890s. Helena's Chinese community, where I live today, was about 700 Chinese people in 1870. That made up about 21% of Helena, the state capital currently's population in 1870. Now you can see there are some vast, wide open spaces out here where it doesn't look like there were Chinese out there. You know what? There's not many people of any ethnicity out there, to be honest with you. I've been driving back and forth between Billings, where I've been staying the last couple of days, and it's definitely wide open, Big Sky country. But I stopped counting here, I stopped indicating on this map 10 or fewer. If I had done that, the map simply would have become too busy. You'd have seen 4 Chinese men in Forsyth, 8 in Glendive, 2 in Nyhart, 1 in Choteau, 1 in Depouillier. So if I had done that, it would be far too busy of a map. But I tried to capture that. And the sheer numbers do tell us a story. You know, in 1870, with the first territorial census of Montana, Chinese Montanans made up about 10 to 12% of the non-native population of Montana Territory. That number spiked and peaked in 1890 at 2,532. Again, likely somewhat of an undercounting. We can estimate about 300 Chinese Montanans, and then a precipitous decline. We might talk about that a little bit today. When I go and talk about the Chinese in Montana, there's always a lot of people who are quite interested, and very few of them are ethnically Asian or ethnically Chinese. This topic is of great interest to Montanans today. I think we almost have a nostalgia for the diversity that we didn't have an acceptance for when it was here. But people are interested in, Montana at one point in time was far more diverse than it is today, and they want to know these histories. As I crunched the numbers to try and tell these statistical stories, I wanted more detail. These raw numbers don't tell us a whole lot. And so going to the census information, we should be able to tell more. We should be able to tell age, gender, occupation, possibly name, and then we can triangulate and track those names. Because to be honest, if you were a Chinese person in Helena in 1870, you might have been a Chinese person in Bozeman in 1900. Movement across space and time might be tracked if we triangulate using the census. However, here's a screenshot from the 1870 territorial census specific to Helena. You can tell the census enumerators did not have much empathy or compassion or patience when interacting with Chinese Montanans, and so they come to us, their identity stripped away, their identities obscured with this quote China boy, quote China woman, quote China man. We see ages, we see the gender diversity here, but it seems as if much has been taken from them. They do rise in other sources though, and the sources rise because of the apparatus of the deportation state. And you all know the 1875 Page Act, the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, further reinforced in 1888 and 1892. And so we see Chinese Montanans caught up in the gears of this deportation state, and they rise to us as objects to whom things happened. Here we see a caricatured Uncle Sam kicking out a caricatured Chinese Montanan. This is from a Montana newspaper, May 3rd, 1894. It's an odd date for deportation, but it was all the rage in the newspapers at the time because the Chinese in Montana had fought the Gary Act and had slowed its implementation. And the day that they had to register was May 4th, 1894, or face deportation. And so the newspaper is kind of crossing its fingers and hoping that they don't register to then be expelled. But that caricature doesn't let us know that man. I mean, Sam Singh is definitely not his name, and that caricature hides his identity, his hopes, dreams, aspirations from us. The Chinese do rise in this in different ways as well. They are deported with glee from the white-controlled newspapers at the time, and they must return, quote, to the land of opium. So they are across the newspapers. Some of these files do give us a little bit more identity. Here we see a mugshot. These individuals were caught without the proper paperwork in northwestern Montana and were very quickly, summarily deported without due process, without access to producing witnesses, arrested, and deportation happened very quickly. And so they rise to us as things to whom the deportation state happened here. I want to get past this and try to know their identity, their hopes and dreams. I want to know not this mugshot, I want to know what's on this guy's mind. He's got an optimistic look. He's an intelligent man, captured in his face. He has hopes, he has dreams. Does he collaborate with anybody? What are those hopes and dreams? What frustrates him? What successes does he have? Is he alone? And no, he's not. Because in this documentary evidence, we see compatriots. Well, there's at least 3 of them who have gathered together for some reason. Oh, there's more. There's more, and there's more. When I found this document, I realized I was onto something, but I also realized I needed to bulk up my knowledge, not just of Montana history, but of Chinese history. This is a photo montage from the Committee of the Chinese Empire Reform Association of Butte, Montana. And you can see the portrait at the top is the Guangxu Emperor. And to tell this story well, I think you not only need to know world history, Chinese history, but Montana history and bring those 3 spheres together. And that's what I try to do. And so what we know, and I'm glad we have some context for this in the earlier panels that were so well done, we know in the 1890s the Dowager Empress receded from control and allowed the Guangxu Emperor to take his rightful reign. She was quite conservative, he was modernizing. He wanted to modernize, westernize, and move China forward in a different direction. And this is approximately 1893-94, he begins making some changes, specifically with these 2 Confucian scholars having his ear. Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao helped inform the Guangxu Emperor about how he might modernize and westernize. And with their advice and his leadership, the 100 Days of Reform is launched in 1898. As the name implies, it didn't last very long, only 103 days, because the Dowager Empress reasserted control. She and her advisors did not like the direction the Guangxu Emperor was taking the country. She reasserts control, puts the Guangxu Emperor under house arrest, where he will remain to his dying day, and the reformers are caught and beheaded. Those who are not caught escape to exile. For our purposes, Kang Youwei and Liang Qichao do escape with their heads on their shoulders, and they work to try and form the Chinese Empire Reform Association, as Dr. Monday mentioned, and I'll talk about a little bit more today. They want to try and release the Guangxu Emperor from house arrest, depose the Dowager Empress, and place the Guangxu Emperor back on the throne. They're brilliant, but they're beset by exile and possible assassination attempts, and they need help. And so what they do is they form branches of the Chinese Empire Reform Association across the world, in Canada, in Mexico, in Burma, South Africa, Australia. My contention is that Montana had the greatest critical mass of branches of the Chinese Empire Reform Association of any place in the world. There were 12 branches of the Chinese Empire Reform Association that you see here. Now, sometimes I'll have a bit of an aside here. Sometimes when you talk about the Chinese in Montana, you will hear people say, you know, there's tunnels that run under every Montana town, and the Chinese lived down in these tunnels, and they were so cowed and so oppressed that they couldn't even live above ground. They lived a subterranean life because they were so cowed and oppressed. Myth, complete myth. And I think you will see the newspapers, the white-controlled newspapers, took great interest in these reform movements and these creations of the branches of the Chinese Empire Reform Association. The Anaconda Standard, Montana's newspapers reported on this with great interest and quite a bit of accuracy, interviewing the Chinese leaders of this whenever they could. And so we hear an interview from one of these people, one of the branches in Butte. We want to let all of our people know just what they're capable of doing when they're given the opportunity. Working and fighting for a good cause, our society includes every Chinese person in this county. Another newspaper account claims, we are meeting with great success everywhere we go, 9 of 10 joining the Reform Society. We go from here, Butte, in a day or two to Livingston. We have been in Helena, where the society claims every Chinese inhabitant. The Chinese in America constitute a very important factor in the regeneration of China. And so these are reported in white-controlled English language newspapers. And we get a sense of the type of things that are being reported, the reforms, the diplomats that are visiting between these different branches. In Billings, about 2 hours directly east of us, it said, almost without exception, the members of the Chinese colony of Billings are affiliated with the Reform Party. As evidence of their sincerity to adopt the Western ideals of civilization and progress, some of the leaders among the colony have used their influence to establish a Chinese school. Tom Huang, who acted as the interpreter and is the leader of the school, stated, quote, if we succeed in our reform efforts, China will open her doors to the world, and the advantages of education and intercourse will soon work a change. China will have taken the first step in the direction that shall end in making her one of the greatest world powers. And the newspapers continue. This is from 1905, and the title there gives a sense to what Dr. Monday was talking about. When did they issue the Q? Okay. And it says, quote, a plan now under consideration by the society here is the establishment of a China school, where all Chinese will be educated. It is expected to branch out and grow until we have a school where we can make statesmen and soldiers. An endeavor will be made to eliminate all the dialects from the Chinese language and make one language universal in China. This will enable us to circulate literature more freely, for under the present existing circumstances, one cannot travel more than 10 miles before he is confronted with a new dialect. So we've got Montana Chinese Empire Reform leaders telling us what they thought, what their hopes and dreams were. And now these newspapers sometimes sent around photographers to photograph the meetings of the Chinese Empire Reform Association. And before I get to that, I'll pause here for a second. Each of the branches created these photo montages, okay? And these are not mugshots. These are the people intentionally sat for these and said something to us about how they wanted to view themselves, how they wanted the world to view them. This is from the Chinese Empire Reform Association of Marysville, Montana. We heard a great presentation yesterday about Marysville, California. There's a Marysville in Montana. Anybody been to Marysville, Montana? Yeah, you know it's a great deep water port, right? It's got great access to the Pacific, as you can see with the battleships. No, it's up in the mountains. It's presently a ghost town. And this might seem like a small Chinese community, but proportionally speaking, this was an important part of Marysville at the time. And these men decided to join this Empire Reform Association, and when they put together their photo montage, they're telling us something. And these ships of war have nothing to do with Marysville, Montana, but they're saying if the Qing dynasty can adopt these reform efforts and become militarily stronger and stand up for itself worldwide, it can stand up for its citizens in rural Montana. So they're telling us something with how they choose to stage these photo montages. Marysville was a tiny community with a a significant Chinese community. A much larger community was in Butte, where this medallion was found in an architectural dig in about, was that 2007 or 8? Right? Just across the street from the Meiwa Society. This was dug up, and I don't think at the time people knew what this medallion was, but you can see the Qing Dynasty crest, plus the Bao Huanghui crest, and the flag there of the Chinese Empire Reform Association, CERA, and the characters along the right side say the Bao Huanghui, the Preserve the Emperor Society, with the Guangxu Emperor in the middle. Then we move on to one of the first thing that I stumbled across. And so this is the photo montage of the Butte branch of the Chinese Empire Reform Association or Society. 33 men are pictured there, of course, with the Guangxu Emperor at the top. Their names and titles are given. And as we look closer, we see a number of things. We see some with traditional Chinese hair with the queue, traditional Chinese dress. We see everyone has kind of an enamel lapel pin of the Guangxu Emperor. To be honest, I don't think that's this. If you look at that, that's a different style than these lapel pins, which I think is exciting because it says it's not just a one and done, but there's layers to this and there's a continuity and a growth and a change about this. We also see some men who are adopting Western hair and Western dress, telling us a change that they're making. This is from 1903, both of these photo montages. And if we look closely, I think we capture a man in the midst of this transformation. This individual here is the only one who has preserved the queue, but is in Western dress. I'm going to go back a slide. You can see him in the bottom center. Usually everybody who has Western hair also has Western dress. I'll go back again to the larger one. You can see a number of Western hair and Western dress, but by far mostly the queue and the Chinese dress. And they all have that lapel pin. But our individual here has a different lapel pin added as well. Anybody see what that is? It's an American flag. 3 of them have this American flag. We don't have this guy's diary. We don't have letters from this individual back and forth to friends and family in southern China. But he is speaking to us. He is telling us how he wants to be depicted, how he views himself, and we might be catching him at exactly that moment of transformation. Maybe moving from being Chinese to Chinese American, having a foot in both worlds. It looks to me like he hasn't shaved his head in a few weeks. So maybe we're catching him in that moment of transition. This is a photograph taken by one of the white newspaper reporters that visited a major gathering. And this is in Uptown Butte on the 2nd story of the Chinese Empire Reform Association headquarters there. And I'll linger on this for a little bit. Actually, a Chinese newspaper reported on this meeting. The Chinese newspaper in April 1905 reported, Chinese Reform Military School opened on April 20th, 1905, and the colleagues specifically prepared a banquet for militaries, teachers, and comrades from other cities. Those who came to attend the opening, where there were more than 70 people, had a grand event. Now there's not 70 people here, but what I believe is this is half of the banquet hall. And so a photograph was taken of this half, and I believe the other half behind the photographer is similarly mirrored. And what we also see is a white newspaper tells us a little bit about this banquet hall. The walls of the association rooms in Butte are covered with photographic groups of different local bodies belonging to the Reform Guard. And if you look, those are photo montages on the walls. Okay? So you see here a large, whoa. Sorry. Oh no, I've jumped all over the place. That's what I get for trying to use the laser pointer. No big deal.
It's just such a present, yeah.
Okay. I've counted up as many as I could here. I count conservatively 18 photo montages from different Chinese Reform Association branches. Now I say there was only 12 in Montana. I do think these came from across borders. They maybe came from north of the border, maybe came from Washington, Oregon, California, where other Chinese Empire Reform Association branches were. And so we see those photo montages on the walls of this. Now the photographer who accompanied the person who wrote this article, so the walls of the association room in Butte are covered with photographic groups of different local bodies belonging to the Reform Guard. There being about 50 photo montages in all. Again, I think they're behind the photographer. The Butte group contains 41 persons. Do you remember how many I said there was on the first photo montage that we saw of Butte? 33. So I think they've taken another picture, and again, the layers and the chronological continuity of these Empire Reform Association branches is telling from this article. Most of whom belong to the military company. In not one of the groups is there the face of an ignorant-looking Chinese. Fully 99% of them are well-dressed in the American costume, showing progressiveness and a desire to attain a height greater than that which the empress of their country would have them attain. Again, that's from 1905, whereas the previous photo montages are from 1903. So we're seeing growth, we're seeing complexity. We're seeing all these different photo montages. One scholar that I consulted with claims, and I won't use the laser pointer again because I'm not that good, top right, that calligraphy in the top right, they claim is actually a gift from Liang Qichao, who visited these branches in 1903. Yes, Liang Qichao came through, visited these branches, tried to raise money, tried to help them cooperate and coordinate, and so he thought very highly of these groups. If you look in the back, and so I'll go back to the original photo, you can see these very stern-looking, older, powerful men in the foreground. They are centered, literally, and who has been decentered? These four white individuals are part of the banquet. They're literally sitting at the kiddie table. Right? And so who are these individuals? Well, it turns out that this branch in Butte and branches across Montana formed military guards. Theoretically, to go back to China and wrest control from the Dowager Empress to put back in charge the Guangxu Emperor. I don't think the men who were taking part in these military branches in Montana really thought of that as a true possibility, but they did form military guards. And the reason I highlight these white individuals is they conscripted Spanish-American War veterans to help them with training, with armaments, with the different parts of forming a military. And so we hear about that military in August '05. The Butte branch has a company which can execute the various commands of its officers with almost the same accuracy and precision as a well-drilled company of American soldiers. Each member has a Spanish Mauser rifle. These were surplus Spanish-American War munitions, and uniform consisting of the regulation white hat with a yellow cord, band, and cross arms, designating the number of the company, yellow canvas blouse and canvas leggings, together with a cartridge belt and bayonet and scabbard attached to the belt. So far, they've burned considerable gunpowder, and many of them are becoming expert marksmen. So again, to go back to that myth that the Chinese in Montana were so cowed that they lived subterranean and could just barely poke their heads above ground, no. These men are living proudly above ground, being interviewed by the newspaper, marching down the streets of Butte, Montana, and target practicing out on the flats of Butte, Montana. Now, in 1905, Kang Youwei actually visits Butte. He visits Livingston, he visits Bozeman, he visits Yellowstone National Park, but he comes specifically to Helena and Butte. And here is him with his party. He's actually, most of the white people in this group are part of the Ben-Hur company. The Ben-Hur production had just been put on to great fanfare. In fact, they had a mechanical chariot race on one of the stages in Butte. So most of these are players with that troupe. But Kang Youwei and his compatriots go along and they visit the original mine. They actually go down a mile into uptown Butte to study copper mining in Butte so that Kang Youwei and that idea could modernize and bring those mining technologies back to China. In fact, oftentimes we think of the Chinese in Montana as being involved in mining. That was indeed true for most part of the state. Butte, though, often called the richest hill in America, prohibited the Chinese from mining in the underground copper mines of Butte. So I would assert that Kang Youwei, when he does descend down there to study mining technology, is the first Chinese to mine, or to mine knowledge possibly, in Butte. And we hear about Kang Youwei's visit and the branch's welcoming of him. 3 members of the Butte branch of the association went to Helena Monday and escorted Kang to the city. The party was met at the depot by a band of music and many of the prominent Chinese of Butte, among whom were Kwang Loi, one of the old merchants of the district. Kang reviewed the soldier boys and paid them a high compliment for efficiency. The captain put them through their various movements without a hitch, stopping at one stage to give the president an opportunity to address the soldiers. Among other things, Kang told them he was proud of the progress they were making. So we've got Kang Youwei, one of the most interesting figures in late 19th, early 20th century Chinese history, visiting Butte, visiting Helena, visiting Livingston, visiting Yellowstone, as Liang Qichao did 2 years previously. And so I return to this individual. He's got a certain gleam in his eye, doesn't he? He's not caught up in the gears of the deportation state. He's got hopes, he's got dreams, he's got the ability to collaborate with others, to strategize, to overcome obstacles, to try and achieve goals. And we know his name. There is a state lecturer who visits the societies in other cities and has visited and spoken to all of them, with the exception of the one in Missoula. His name is Hao Su, and is at present in the city of Chicago. He will return in about 2 weeks and will then visit Missoula. And so I think we can get past that anonymous, quote, Chinaman of the 1870 census and these artifacts that were left behind from the various branches of the Chinese Empire Reform Associations across Montana, allow us to see Chinese Montanans as they saw themselves. They come to us as proud reformers, transnational leaders, soldiers, and statesmen actively engaged in a global struggle to strengthen their homeland and themselves through self-empowerment. Thank you.